Welcome to Sociology Burger. Do you want fries with that? It sounds like a simple question, right? But today, we're going to unpack the hidden ingredients that go into how power really works. And I mean really. Forget what you think you know about brute force and armies. We're diving into the brilliant mind of Antonio Gramsci to figure out the subtle, secret recipe that gets all of us to buy into the system.
All right, so let's set the scene. Back at the turn of the 20th century, a lot of very smart people, especially Marxists, were predicting that massive workers' revolutions were just around the corner. They were expected to sweep through all the big capitalist countries, Germany, France, Britain. But here's the thing, they just didn't happen. Russia had its revolution for sure, but the West, it stayed surprisingly stable. So this became this huge puzzle that just consumed one of the most original thinkers of the time. He had one big question. What was holding the old order together?
So who was this guy with the answer? His name was Antonio Gramsci. And listen, he wasn't some academic just thinking deep thoughts in an ivory tower. No way. This guy was in the thick of it. He was a journalist, an activist, a co-founder of the Italian Communist Party. And here's the kicker. He would develop his most profound, world-changing ideas from the one place the powerful thought they could shut him down for good, a fascist prison cell.
And if you look at his life, you can see how his ideas took shape. I mean, he starts out in 1913, joining the Socialist Party in Turin, this big industrial city. He's right there on the ground. Then, by 1921, he's co-founding the Communist Party of Italy, so he's a major player. But then, 1926 hits. He gets arrested by Mussolini's fascist regime, even though he had parliamentary immunity. And it's in that prison, starting around 1929, that he begins writing his famous prison notebooks. It's incredible, really. Battling horrible health, he creates this monumental work that would, end up outliving both him and the very people who locked him up.
Just listen to this. The fascist prosecutor at his trial said, "We must stop this brain from functioning for 20 years. Wow. I mean, just think about that. They didn't just want to lock up a man. They wanted to shut down a mind. It tells you everything you need to know about how dangerous they thought his ideas were. They absolutely knew that his thoughts were a bigger threat than any gun or bomb.
So, what was this big, dangerous idea? How did Gramsci finally solve that riddle of the missing revolution? Well, the answer comes down to one powerful, totally game-changing concept. The word is hegemony. And believe me, this wasn't just some fancy new academic term. It was a whole new way of seeing how power really works in our world.
Okay, so what exactly is hegemony? Basically, Gramsci said it's how a ruling class gets the rest of us to go along with the system. Not by force, not by pointing a gun at your head. No, it's much smarter than that. It's about making their worldview, their way of seeing things, feel like it's just normal, like it's the only natural, common-sense way for society to be. You know the idea that if you just work hard, you'll get ahead? That's a perfect example. Hegemony is what makes that feel like a universal truth, instead of what it might be, a specific idea that happens to be really useful for a particular economic system.
So think of it like this. Gramsci says that modern rule is built on two main pillars. The first pillar is force, what he called coercion. This is the obvious stuff, right? The army, the police, the courts. It's the state's hard power. It's what happens when you step out of line. But the second pillar, and this is the one that's usually more important, is consent. That's hegemony. This is the soft power, and it works through all the everyday parts of our lives that shape how we think and what we believe to be true.
And this idea leads to what Gramsci called the integral state. So, his point was, you can't just think of the state as, the government and the police. The real modern state is this powerful combination of the two things we just talked about. It's political society, that's the force, plus civil society, that's where consent is built. He described it as a kind of fortress. You've got the inner castle with all the soldiers and guards, that's the coercion. But surrounding it is this huge, powerful outer wall, and that wall is made of consent.
Okay, so if power is really won through consent, what does that mean? It means politics isn't just about what happens on election day or on a battlefield. It becomes this long, slow struggle for our hearts and minds, a kind of war for common sense. So the big question is, where is this war actually fought?
Well, Gramsci said it's fought in the trenches of civil society, and these trenches are everywhere. Think about it. Schools. They don't just teach us math. They teach us a specific version of our country's history. Churches and religion. They shape our moral compass. The news and media. They decide what stories are important and how they get told. Even things like unions, popular books, TV shows, folklore. They all reinforce certain ideas about what's right, what's fair, what success looks like. These aren't just neutral parts of our world. For Gramsci, they are the battlegrounds. They're the deep, complex defenses of the current system.
And this is exactly why the kind of revolution that happened in Russia just didn't work in the West. See, in Tsarist Russia, civil society was pretty weak. It was like that fortress having a really flimsy outer wall. So a quick, direct assault, what Gramsci called a war of maneuver, could actually succeed. But in the West, no way. The trenches of civil society were just too deep, too strong. That fortress wall was solid. So Gramsci argued that for any real change to happen in the West, you had to fight a different kind of battle, a war of position, a long, slow, patient struggle to win influence inside those very trenches, inside schools, media, and culture, before you could ever hope to challenge the state itself.
And what's the ultimate goal of this war of position? It's to transform what we think of as common sense. Now, for Gramsci, common sense isn't some pure, simple truth. It's more like a messy toolbox of ideas we've all inherited. It's a jumble of traditions, beliefs, bits of folklore, maybe even some superstitions, and a lot of it contradicts itself. It's just the stuff we use to make sense of the world day to day. Hegemony is when a ruling group gets to organize that messy toolbox for us, shaping that raw material, he called it senso comune, into a worldview that, surprise, surprise, supports their power. So the goal of any challenge to that power isn't to get rid of common sense, but to critically look at it and build a new, more aware and more coherent version.
You know, it's pretty amazing when you stop and think about it. These ideas were written down by a man in a prison cell almost 100 years ago, and they might be more relevant today than they've ever been. What Gramsci gave us wasn't just a theory. He gave us a toolkit, a set of tools for seeing how power works that goes way beyond just politics or economics. He helps us see the cultural battles that are happening all around us every single day.
And I mean, you see his ideas everywhere once you start looking. When scholars analyze how different news channels frame the exact same story to shape what you believe, that's pure Gramsci. When people critique the way school textbooks present history to build a certain kind of patriotism, they're using his tools. His work helps us make sense of, well, almost everything, from understanding the rise of populism to seeing the subtle power dynamics at play in your favorite Netflix show.
So let's leave it with this. Maybe Gramsci's most powerful legacy isn't an answer at all, but a question. A question he forces every single one of us to ask ourselves. Think about the beliefs you hold that just feel obvious, the things you take for granted, about work, about success, about what's normal. Where did those ideas actually come from? What makes up your common sense? And here's the most important part. Who does that common sense really, truly serve?